I'm here today with Bishop C. Andrew Doyle, 9th Bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of Texas. Bishop Doyle summarizes his autobiography in 6 words: met Jesus on pilgrimage, still walking. He's the author of several books, but we are here to discuss 2 of them in particular. One is called Citizen, Faithful Discipleship in a Partisan World, and the second is called Embodied Liturgy, Virtual Reality and Liturgical Theology in Conversation. You can follow Bishop Doyle on Twitter at TexasBishop, or catch his popular weekly podcast and Bible study blog at texasbishop.blogspot.com. So Bishop Doyle, it's really a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Well, we haven't talked before. We haven't worked before. It's really exciting to get to know you, and I've really enjoyed learning more about your work. Could you tell us just a little bit more about your background before we get into the books and such?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I was an art major in college and then went off to seminary shortly thereafter. Served as an assistant in an Episcopal congregation, and then did a Restart congregation, and then began to work for the bishop that served in this diocese before me. So I've actually been within the diocesan office now for almost 17 years and bishop for 12 of those. I mean, that's kind of the work side of things. When it comes to conversations that I enjoy having, I find that it really has to do with the work I'm doing. So early on, trying to do some practical theology and missiology with congregations. The first book I did, that's still probably one of the best, kind of people really enjoy it, is Unabashedly Episcopalian. And that was, I just felt like at that point in 2008, that our own denomination was just, like many, suffering from this lack of confidence in itself. And I wanted to kind of offer something hopeful. And then that quickly moved into talking about, well, what does mission look like? What's it going to look like in the future? How do churches engage that? And then I started to have some conversation with people, and they said, well, why would we do mission that doesn't put people in our pews? Why would we engage? And so Jesus Heist came out of that, this idea that, wait a minute, we have a whole mission that has nothing to do with the church. Really, the church is a piece of it. It's one part of undertaking the mission, but it is not the mission, and that we should kind of put those things in relationship with each other. And then I did a piece that a lot of people don't know about called Vocatio, which is on vocations and unpacking a little bit of the Reformed idea around what vocations are. And that's important because you want to talk about the book Citizen. It was there I began to really unpack and think about who are we serving? Who is this God that we're serving? What does this God really want, desire of us, the world, creation? How do we participate in that? And so Citizen is the first in a series of 3, and it is trying to answer some of the questions that philosopher and religious philosopher Charles Taylor offers us, which is about the modern mind and how we engage inwardly, how do we engage space, how do we engage, or creation, how do we engage in politics today? And trying to undermine that, not undermine Charles Taylor, I agree with and much, but trying to undermine our modern sensibilities, our modern identity, if you will, by offering a kind of a counter narrative to it. And Citizen was the first in trying to bring forward some of that conversation I was having with myself and others about vocations. Say, wait a minute, something much bigger is going on here.
Well, so the first thing I have to ask you on the vocation front, whether or not you were able to tap into some of Frederick Buechner's writing about that topic.
Yeah, so actually I use Buechner a lot in my Bible study work. I have a Bible study blog and offer some reflection about the lessons that are coming up each week, and find some of the work that you've been able to put online and make accessible to people really helpful. I find that there. I don't remember if I mentioned him in the book, but I cut my teeth on Buechner early on, along with others like Brueggemann and Hauerwas in seminary. And so, I've been a fan of his work and find it really pushes in a similar way that I want to push. I mean, I think that some of what really excites me is when my faith is challenged and given an opportunity to stretch itself. And I think Buechner's writing, among others, is one of those theologians who has done that for us and invites us to stretch a little.
I thought he was really ahead of his time, a lot of things that he wrote, which is interesting now when you look back on things he wrote in the 70s and 80s,
Right.
like was really prescient, prophetic, I guess.
Right.
But his vocation quote is the most quoted Buechner quote.
Is it really?
Yeah. I mean, as you know, I used to keep track of those kinds of things. And
Right.
So of anything, I mean, it's a nice, terse, succinct, profound statement, which many of his were. But that one in particular was quoted more often than any other.
That's amazing. I had no idea and wouldn't have guessed that actually. I would have thought maybe something else. He's an inspirational person. And not just because he was taking on things that I think still are relevant today, but also the way he writes is really good for social media. I mean, he just kind of gets these punches in that I think are kind of brilliant.
I mean, that's exactly what we found out. I mean, he wrote all of these short essays that today we would call blogs.
Right.
And he wrote that in the days before there was any such thing.
Right.
But between that and his other little pithy quotes, I mean, it was just incredibly applicable to social media. No question about that. So I'm really curious about, the fact that Citizen's the first of three. Have you scoped out what the next two are going to be looking like yet?
Well, I know that I want to do one that is purely a piece on the individual and individual flourishing in relationship to communal flourishing. So kind of an anthropology. I think the one I'm working on having the most energy around is space and creation and the idea that we have moved from a idea of cosmos and connectedness, which is very much a part of the Old and New Testament ideas of theology and creation, to a place of a very divided, separated, and objectified view of the universe, and that I'm not sure that's what the scripture is inviting us to think. There's a lot of pushback about creation and thinking about our responsibility and stewardship over the earth. But I'm interested in a theology that's big enough to take those things on. I actually think they're present in the scripture, but I think we've so removed ourselves from being able to understand ourselves as part of it, which is very much a scriptural understanding of the world around us. And so because we're not part of it anymore, it tends to get commodified. And I'd like to talk about that, talk about our responsibility and stewardship. And likewise, I think that the idea of what it means to be community has been changed. And so no longer are we a community that, even if we were to look at an understanding of Rousseau or Locke, there's still such a sense of serving the good. Whereas today, I feel like we're much more interested in tribal flourishing. And I say tribal because I actually think it's that what we see today and what I would call partisan politics is really a lot of individuals who agree with one another in groups. So it may say, oh, well, we really are about everybody's flourishing, except I don't think we are. I think we're really about our flourishing. It just happens that our understanding of our flourishing agrees with all these other people. And so I think we're in a very tribalistic political environment right now. And none of that really fits with the scriptural understanding of what it means to be community at all, and what the purpose of that community is supposed to be, as an overarching arc, if you read the scripture.
I couldn't agree with you more. So let's dive into Citizen specifically.
Sure.
How is that
Sure.
kind of organized? How did you structure that book?
Well, there was a lot of, it's hard to imagine where we were in 2016. But I began to think at that point that there were some major issues with the way in which we were going about this. And there was, and I think still is today, a retelling of the American story in very debatable, like, I just don't think people knew their history very well. And so, right. So, and I mean, like, when was the last time anybody studied history? I mean, like, think about that, even in our upbringing in the U.S.
It's really
the last time I had U.S. history was in 1987, right? So anything else I got by reading, and I probably read more history than most because I love it. So, if you think about the general person on the street, that, maybe they had it in college, maybe they didn't, maybe they managed to get out of it in some way, or they don't retain anything. So our memory is very short-lived, and certainly it's even translated. So I began with kind of retelling the story. And I read a lot of John Meacham, and he's been a coach and friend and contributor for a long time. So I really gravitated to some of his work to look at what do we really think in general about our founding in this country. And then I wanted to talk about how there is an American religiosity, and that religiosity actually has a flavor to it, but that religiosity is different than a Christian view of our ministry as a community. And that we should be clear about that. I mean, as Christians, we should be wary of that, I think. Be aware of the difference, that God might actually ask us to be different in our community than to be Americans who just may happen to be Episcopalian, Methodist, Presbyterian, non-denom, whatever. That's a different thing. To be an American first and then to be a Christian is not at all what any of our forebears really thought about how the world worked. That is a modern humanist concept. And so actually Christians who were arguing, any Christian arguing for an idea that the American religiosity, whatever it was, should be our number one thing, actually was doing nothing more than adding to secularity, the thought of individual. I mean, it goes on. It just repeats its same old stuff. And so I want to grab that, but also kind of deal with the fact, I love America. I love our country, warts and all. And how do I fly a flag honestly? And how do I, right? How do I deal with how I feel about our country in a way that as a Christian, I'm able to do that and honestly face our deficits, my deficits as a citizen in that. That's a lot.
Yeah.
You made a mistake asking a bishop to answer a question. Sorry.
Well, that's the whole idea.
Going.
See where your head's at on some of these different things. Would you say you had a particular target audience in mind for this book?
Well, like I said earlier, I think that I was dealing with it because my people were dealing with it. I'm given sheep, and you can imagine all of them are different in their mindset about what's going on. And this deeply came out of a desire to offer a place to stand that made their unity in Christ and relationship with God a priority rather than their political view. And as a Christian, I think that's kind of the point. I mean, we can get to what it means for politics and all that, but you can't ever get to the work, I don't think, of being a citizen with dual citizenship. You're not going to ever do that well if you do it from a place of disunity as a Christian. So it's always, we didn't choose each other. It's part of the Christian message. We didn't choose each other. God has chosen us by virtue of the cross, just as God chose Abraham and Sarah in the beginning. We're chosen to be a part of a family whose members we did not pick. And unless you can start from that, you're going to be somewhere else faster than you know it. And I believe that. I believe in that all my heart in that. And it doesn't, your political view, I may disagree with it. Don't get to not have you as my brother or my sister, right? And yet as a church, I felt like, and do feel like, we've thrown all of that out. And we're unwilling for the sacrificial act of either having to speak truthfully to each other and own the consequences of that, to do so without shame or out of a sense of punishment or anger or hatred. That's costly for Americans right now.
So have you, in the book, kind of examined how we apply what you're saying from a practical perspective? Meaning, if we recognize this issue of prioritization that we have, right, and we want to act upon it, how is that reflected in fighting against racism? Or how is that reflected in dealing with immigration? Or how is that how does that impact the practical aspects of what we're dealing with today?
Right. Well, I do. Yes, I think the last, you could write a whole book on that, I think.
I think so too.
quite honestly. And I'm eager to see what you have to offer coming out of your work with compassionate Christianity and the people you've been working with. That being said, I find it very compelling that at the end of the day, we have to actually sit with each other and talk. But that requires people to do that. So who do I find are the bravest? Those who are actually willing to sit and disagree at the same table and to have a conversation and to work it out. But it also requires those who don't agree to listen to each other and to listen to the stories of other people and not devalue them because you don't agree. You actually have to value them. And so we're doing a lot of work in our diocese around that, both trying to prepare people for the story that they may not know that others tell about them when we look at racial work, but then also to actually engage in the work of having conversations and working with people in the community and trying to bridge some of those deep kind of Grand Canyons, if you remember that movie, right? The Grand Canyons of our life, where we're not living the same lives. And that doesn't mean that the other life isn't of value and have a word of truth for us. Actually, I think it does. And the cruciform part is getting over our truth to actually listen and let the other one break in. And somewhere in between, God is present, I think. And so, so yes, there's a whole section at the end, and it's actually some work that Hauerwas did, but it's called Tabling Christian Citizenship. And it's to look at, basically look at the way in which, of course, for Christians, we and Episcopalians, we think very much about the Last Supper, the table, the sacramental act of tabling. And so, I like to say, and I don't remember, I wish I could remember who I picked it up from, but I didn't come up with it, but it was a great quote, which is, what does it mean to actually table in the wilderness? We walk out there and you're willing to set up a table and see who comes up and visits. or you set up a table where people who of difference are able to sit at. But our job actually as Christians is to set the table, right? It's not to divide us up and so that we can win over each other, have power over each other. That's never been the point. That's just repeating what society does all the time. Our job is actually to sit at a table with people of great difference. And I think you can look at that in the Old Testament. You can look at it in the way in which Jesus picked his first disciples. You know, and in our tradition right now, we're reading through the book of Acts as part of our Easter readings, and you see all the different people that they sit at table with. They literally sit with. This week coming up is Philip and the eunuch. And it's actually the eunuch who invites Philip to sit with him, not Philip who invites the eunuch. So, you know, I feel like when it comes to race, we have 20% of our population asking us to sit at table with them. And this is actually what we do. So we should sit at table and listen before we speak, which is also what Philip does.
So I think you will enjoy some of the chapters in this How to Heal Our Divides book, because they are embodying the methodology you just described a moment ago about being in the same room, staying in the same room, and listening despite disagreements.
Right.
So, you know, they're using some of the same, you know, methodology that you're talking about. And some of these are organizations that are secular, and some of them are, you know, faith-based. So, and I didn't mention this to you before, but I'm probably going to do a second book along this too. And so maybe, you know, we could use some of the examples from your diocese to contribute to that too. But in any event,
I mean, we are lumbering forward and making tons of mistakes, but I think it's actually doing the work, right? I mean, I think it's when we dare to do the uncomfortable work, and you know, that's what really excites me. But I also think it excites us, because I think it stirs something of Christ's nature in us when we venture out into that divide.
Well, one of the other examples from the Episcopal Church that's contained in the book is Catherine Meek's organization.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So she's written one of the chapters of the book. So
fantastic. She's an excellent leader in this. And, you know, and she's so peace-filled and steady and consciously aware of not doing damage and pain to those who are trying, but yet very clear and offering that invitation for us to be transformed. She is an amazing leader and prophet in our church right now.
The amount of work that she's done over the years is just, you know, amazing.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Ron, I'm sure you have that sense of, like, we get to sit with these people. I mean, it's not just her, but I mean, looking at some of the people that you've interviewed and all that, like, wow, and this job, you get to sit. I get to sit with these people, these amazing, amazing people of every color and background, and I think the vision becomes clear of what God really wants in that.
But I think, you know, one of the issues we have is that it's too hidden. You know, you may know about Catherine Meek's work, but how many other people across the country do? Yeah. Right. And, you know, all we hear in the evening news is all the bad things, you know, that happen. We don't hear about the hope and the good things and all these good things that people are doing. So that's part of the purpose of this effort, is to raise awareness of that.
Right. This is great.
So, you know, while we're here, we should touch on the new book that you're coming out with, Embodied Liturgy, Virtual Reality and Liturgical Theology and Conversation. So, you know, that's a much different slant, obviously, than Citizen.
Yeah, it's got a good philosophy in the front of it. I mean, it's a good bit of philosophy in the front of it. You'll have to decide whether it's any good or not. But that comes out of the pandemic conversations around liturgy and worship online. And for us as a sacramental church in the Episcopal Church, you know, what do you do with sacraments? Is that something that can happen online? How does that happen? What's that look like? And what I found myself saying is, and we have followed the protocols and went online, and we've done everything to try and keep people safe and to save lives. At the same time, what does it mean as a predominantly white church to suggest that we should abandon creation and the conversations with our neighbors, especially around race, at the one moment they actually need us? So the idea of moving consciousness and prayer into a mind-oriented, artificial intelligence, social media governed format is to disembody the gospel in a way that for a church that believes and understands the incarnation as a key missional theology, is to neglect the desire of people to sit with and to work out the problems of the world, to neglect the devastation of climate change that we're seeing. Who cares where it comes from? I mean, at this point, let's just try and stop it. I mean, we have to do something, right? So whatever it takes, let's, for goodness sake, not abandon the world. And that's really the message of the text, which is this is a moment for us to lean towards each other as human beings, as members of the creation, to embody ourselves and to recognize the embodiment of others. We can't, and when we're in our heads, we can't see the violence that's done to Black bodies and people of color and the bodies of color. We don't see that. And I think it's disturbing to think of church arguing for kind of the disembedding from the world into a environment online. So should we be online and in person? By all means. But life happens elsewhere. And online will always and should only be, I think, a tool to draw us together in new and different ways. But at the end of the day, again, I think we have to be in community, embodied community with each other.
Well, it's an interesting conversation, and I think it's one that's going to continue to evolve.
Exactly.
Personally, having been a technology guy most of my life, I'm thrilled with the advanced means of communications that we have now that we didn't 20 years ago. And we haven't figured it out yet, right? We don't know how to use them effectively right now, and they're misused an awful lot, no question about that. However, guess which way the pendulum is swinging.
Well, we have to, we can't abandon the world of online world at all. That's not at all what I'm saying. We shouldn't abandon it. It's just, how do we exist in our lives together, and how does it have an appropriate place within that? And I think that's the big question, right? Is, what is it good for?
Well, I know personally speaking, since the pandemic hit, I mean, and using Zoom like crazy, right? Yeah. I mean, it's allowed us, and I'll speak for myself here, to form communities that otherwise would not exist.
Exactly.
Communities around specific topics, and not just form, but form meaningful relationships and meaningful conversations, and things that are geographically dispersed and not geographically constrained.
Right.
And
exactly.
That's very powerful.
It is powerful, but it's only powerful if it makes a difference in the world.
Oh, of course. Absolutely.
Right. Exactly. So that's the point. Like, the book on citizens, great. If you do nothing with it, it failed. Mm-hmm. This is great. If we do nothing by learning from each other, then this fails. I mean, this can be great and enlivening for the two of us. Before my mother died, I would have said, hey, she'll watch, she'll listen to my podcast. But the reality is, it's only as good as it drives us forward to incarnational life with each other, which means changing our communities, changing the politics of our nation into a format that enables all people here to flourish in terms of the topic, right? So I do think it has, yes, it is good. It's amazing. you and I might not have ever done this.
We probably wouldn't have, because
Right?
I don't make it down to Texas very often.
Exactly. So it would have happened. But by doing this, if we could enliven actual living embodied people to change what they're doing, or sit at some table with somebody they've been divorced from, in terms of relationships, sit with somebody they divorced because of the friendship and they didn't want to have anything to do with them because they were a Trump or a Biden or whatever. If one person sat at a table with somebody they deeply disagreed with and actually said, I love you more than our disagreement, could we begin there? We would have done something. But if nothing happens, and this is just something wonderful to watch, if it doesn't support us in doing the work, it's great for you and me. It's a great effort.
I mean, anything we do can't just be talk, right?
Exactly. It can't live. And that's my point. It can't live online. Is what happens online powerful? By all means it is. Is it have a purpose? Yes. Actually, it draws us into living life in new and creative ways. It should. But if it doesn't, if the purpose is to live here in this artificial world forever.
Yeah, I'm certainly not an advocate of that.
And I don't think you are, but that's the book, right? Just to play with that way of thinking.
Interesting. Well, that one is coming out soon.
Like in a couple of days.
Oh.
And I think it's really interesting to think about it compared to like church, which has a whole section. It has a whole section on living on the internet and how to use the cultural trends for social media and stuff for mission. So I'm very pro online work. We think the churches shouldn't go offline. If you're online now, worshiping, you need to stay online. It's going to be the primary way in which people find you and get to know you. So, I'm very pro this Zoom relationship building. I mean, we got more people in Bible studies today than we did before the pandemic.
That's awesome.
More book studies, more prayer groups. Yeah. So it to your point, it's a great format. We need to use it for the mission that God has invited us to. So, yeah.
It's a medium. It's a medium. It's a tool, right? I mean, you just have to figure out how to effectively use it.
Exactly. And not do damage with it.
Right. Yeah. Well, Bishop Doyle, it's really been a pleasure to meet you and have this conversation with you.
Yeah, I loved it.
I think that we have some, future topics of conversation and collaboration together. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, I'd be glad to do that. And I feel like I found a new platform to listen to, and I'm so grateful you reached out. It's a real honor actually to be a part of this conversation, and I'm amazed at the work you're accomplishing, whether it's helping people of color write and get published, or bringing people together on the politic and political issues. All of it's really amazing work, and I'm so happy that you invited me to do it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I mean, I get it off easy because I don't have to write, like all you guys do. I just bring people together and talk about it. So.
Yeah, the best. It's the best. You're like the bishop of compassionate Christianity.
No. I haven't been ordained to be anything other than a deacon and an elder, but
Even better. That's the better part for sure.
Well, thanks again. I really appreciate spending some time together, and we'll certainly stay in touch.
Will do. Thank you.